Welcome back to another CSS Flexbox video. And in this video, I'm going to show you kind of the final thing that we have, which is to use the Flex Grow and Flex Shrink properties. And we'll actually combine those together into, excuse me, what's called the just the Flex property. And it's going to add Flex Grow, Flex Shrink, and Flex Basis into one combined selector, so it's going to be a little bit easier to use. So what we have here as far as the setup is a flex wrapper that's wrapping these three elements, and then we have three boxes with the class of Flexbox, and then we're targeting each of the specific boxes, box 1, 2, and 3. There's a little bit of content inside of each one. You can see that the parent container here is Flex Wrapper, and it's display flex, it's max width 800, and then auto so that it'll be centered in the page. We have space between. You can see that the boxes go all the way to the edge when they start to collapse, and then whenever they get to the 200 pixel height, then they wrap. See that? Each flex box is 200 by 200 with pink background, and the color is white. And then each of these boxes is actually, I've created them to be their own flex container. And the content inside of it is center aligned, so you can see how that nesting works here. So each one of these is wrapped inside of a larger parent Flexbox container, but you can actually make each individual element a Flexbox container as well. So the nesting part of Flexbox makes it very powerful because you can use it all over the page. And it's not it's an element specific type of technique for moving things around inside the elements. It's not like an overarching uh, framework or system for only layout and things like that, though you can use it for making some layout choices. But in this one, we're going to use Flex Grow and Flex Shrink. Going back again to the CSS Tricks Guide to Flexbox. And so let's take a look at Flex Grow. Now it defines the ability for an item to grow if necessary. So you can see that you have three predefined elements here. And then if you attach Flex Grow to this middle element, it's going to grow and take up the space that's in between. So you see the space, these gaps. If you wanted it to, this center item to be able to take up all of that space, then you would come down here and you would say box 1 or box 2, I'm sorry. Flex Grow 1, and then when you assign a number, then it makes this grow into this space. So when we don't have that, it accepts the 200 pixels by 200 pixels by 200 pixels. But as soon as you attach Flex Grow, it tells this one you have the ability to grow and take up all the remaining space. So if we make this also a red color where you can see it, you can see now that because they only have 200 pixels wide, they are actually going to retain their shape and stay rigid, so they're not changing shape. But this Flex Grow item inside of here is going to grow, and then when it gets to be 200 pixels wide, then that's when it's going to cause the change. You can see here. So right there, all of these boxes are now 200 pixels wide. It's just that this one is taking up all the space as it moves along. And then it takes up the remaining space again until it gets to 200 pixels, and then it takes up all the remaining space down here. Now if we were to take this away, you can see how these boxes move. So instead of something taking up this space, it's just empty, but it's being, it's shrinking the space. And then when we get to the 200, before this red box was extending all the way out to cover this space, but now it's not. Okay, so you can see how there's continuity with the flex grow so that there's still connectedness of the elements. But without flex grow, it's more of a grid type system, right? So it's just a different kind of use case. So essentially you're just giving permission for these to break out of the predetermined size that you've given them, and they retain that to some extent, but they're also able to leak out and to take up the remaining white space that's in between the items. So that's Flex Grow. Let's see. Let's try a couple different things. So let's say we just take off. Well, that's not exactly what we wanted. Let's do the width. Okay. And let's say box 1. We wanted to do that. So box 1, and we'll do flex row 1. So now you can see that box 1 is taking up all the space. And so you have a nice like I don't know, maybe 2/3, 1/4, 1/4 type of layout, right? And then when your box gets down to that 200 point, then it's going to cause the other things. So you see this box is losing its 200 pixel space. And so now as they all get to 200, then it's going to push it down. And then when this box gets to 200 again, you can see it's lining up right here. And it's going to wrap it again. Okay. You can see that there's a lot of versatility with allowing these boxes to grow and to take up the available space inside your layout. The flex shrink is you're not going to see a lot of difference here, but if you have a grow and a shrink together, then it's going to allow things to I don't know. Quite honestly, I'm not exactly sure where you would use flex shrink. I know that it allows the flex item to shrink if necessary. So instead of being, it's kind of like there's a maximum width and then it'll shrink below that. I honestly haven't used flex shrink very much. I've used flex grow a lot more to be able to take up the available space. And also, let's cover flex basis. So it's the default size of the element before the remaining space is distributed. So instead of doing our width here, we could actually put this on each individual element. So we could say 200 pixels. And now it's made this element 200 pixels wide. And you could do the same thing here. So now we have a 200 pixel wide element here. We have 200 pixel wide element here. Do box 3. Then we also have a 200 pixel wide element here. Now if you don't declare some sort of size, you saw that, but if some other ones declare size, then it's going to lead to this element just kind of wrapping under like this. So instead of putting our width and height and declaring it here for each individual flex box, or for all the different flex boxes together, you can actually declare a different width and height. But because these are inflexible, it's going to lead to some kind of strange wrapping, because once it wraps, this is not going to fill the available space. Now, one of the ways that we can get around that is I'm going to show you how to combine the elements um, into one selector, right? So it's flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. They can all be put together, and it looks like this. So this is a flex grow, flex shrink, and then flex basis. And remember, the flex basis is just the starting width that you want the element to be, right? So we want the width to start at 400 pixels, and that gives it a hard and defined pixel width. So if we just take this away and we just call it flex, then we do, let's say 1, which is flex grow, 0 for flex shrink. So when we get to our wrapping, you can see that now it's growing with the content. See it here. So when it gets here, it doesn't leave all that white space here because it's set to flex grow 1, and it'll take up the remaining space. Now if we also did that for this, then you would see even more fluidity. You see how there's space there right now? But if we say flex 1, 0, and 200, now it's going to also grow, and we give it permission to grow and take up the remaining space as well. So you can see if we do it to the third one, when we get to wrap here, then it's actually going to be, when it wraps around, it's going to fill in that space as well. So you can see how you can create um, a more fluid type of layout by allowing these elements to grow into the spaces, into the white spaces as they begin to wrap and as they begin to go down the page. Now, you may not want this necessarily for everyone, but it could be something that you're looking for. Now, the problem with you're still setting a defined width, so you start to get an issue here. Because your width here, your flex basis, is still defined. So when you're like this, there is some fluidity, there is some flexibility, but once this long container begins to, you're at 430, once you get below 400, you can see that because this container is 400 pixels wide, you set that here, that it's going to start to push off the page. It's already creating a bar here. Now these are still going to be really flexible, but you're seeing no flexibility here. So this is a fixed width container, 400 pixels wide, and it is not going to, when it gets to the edge, it's not going to be responsive like these elements are. And in fact, when these elements get to 200, so right here at 200, then they also are going to become inflexible. So it's just something to remember if you're going to set a flex basis of an actual number, that you're not going to, once it gets below that number, the screen size, then it's not going to continue to respond to the edge of the viewport. Now what we could do is we could add this as, instead of regular hard boxes, we could say auto. Let's just do, the default is 0. The default is 0, 1, auto. So now you're giving it permission to shrink. See how it shrinks as we move? You're giving it permission to shrink, and then this is going to be a fully responsive box. And what it's going to do is it's going to automatically size itself to the content. So there won't be any space. There won't be any extra space for the content to go. But it will be responsive. You don't get a toolbar down here or a scroll bar. So it is going to be responsive, but it's going to take up as much space as it needs to take up. So you have to kind of choose what you're going to do and how you want the elements to respond to one another. The other way would be to go back to the way it was. And then let's say at 400, 400 pixels. So you would just do at media and with 400 pixels. Then you would do this flex 10400. But otherwise, we want to just do this. So when you're here, then the box is going to be 400 pixels. As soon as you get underneath 400, you see we get right here. Then you can see that oh, that should be auto. Sorry. Okay. Um, well, that's gonna mess it up too. Let's do 0, 1 and auto. Let's reset it back to the default. See, okay, so that's what we're looking for. All right, so when you're outside of 400 pixels, it's gonna give it 400 pixels of space. You can see that it retains its shape. But when it gets to 400 pixels, it starts to, it doesn't create the scroll bar effect. You see how that, if we were here, and that's what this part here was, then under 400 pixels, then we should have seen it push off to the right edge of the page. But instead, at this media query at 400 pixels, it goes back to what its original setting was, and that is that it shrinks and takes up the available space when it shrinks, and then it's automatically sized to the viewport. So again, this is the default setting. So the default for Flexbox actually is responsive. So if you want to move that and do something like this, you are taking it out of an automatically responsive state, and you are making it more rigid. So just remember that if you want to get back to the default, this is a default setting. I have found in my personal experience, and I've used this actually in production, um, if if you're going to design for Internet Explorer, you need to put this. It's explicit in caniuse.com that you need to actually say flex 01 auto for the default of the element. Otherwise, it won't work properly with Internet Explorer. And then if we did the same thing with these others, then you would begin to see let's give this same default setting here. And same here. Box 3. This. Then here is going to be 0, 1, auto. And so when we come out here, we're going to get all of our boxes with their predetermined sizes. And even here, they're going to retain their predetermined sizes. But once you get here, there's no scroll bar because right now they're in their default state once they get down to 400 pixels, right? So now everything is stacked and in its default state, which is going to be responsive. So you can see by using media queries how you can change things. You can make things a little bit different. Let's say we wanted this to be 400 as well. So now you can see that each of these takes up half. It takes up 400 pixels. And then this one is going to, because we gave it the ability to grow and to take up the rest of the space, it's actually going to, it's set at 200, but it's going to take up all the remaining space in the row. And then when those things change, we meet, all the space gets taken up and it has to be pushed down to another row. This one is still going to take up 400 pixels. This one is still taking up 400 pixels as well. It's just that there's no other element up here with it, so it's going to grow because we've told it that it can grow here, and that it can take up the remaining space. And so it's taking up the remaining space, and so is this. And when that goes down, when this meets its edge, because it's only 200 pixels, then it will go down to the next line. And then you move into the responsive styles. So you can see how you can create some really interesting layouts using Flex Grow and Flex Shrink. I hope it's not too confusing. You just need to play with Flex Grow and the Flex Shrink properties and the Flex Basis properties. You just have to kind of play with them for a while to understand how they're working together in relation to one another. But I think if you do, and if you use this guide kind of to help you um, understand, kind of what's going on, then you'll begin to get a better understanding. But ultimately, project to project, I'm just using, I'm kind of experimenting. You know the general concept, but then you got to kind of experiment with the actual numbers because you can do some kind of cool things with it. Let me show you one more thing that you can do. Um, so let's set these back. So we have our boxes, and try to think about how to set this up. I wasn't planning on doing this part. So let's say our boxes don't have, their width is everything's set to auto. So width. Okay, so we have they're automatically being positioned uh, vertically. So the content is determining how tall it is. We're not giving it a fixed height. We're just giving it a fixed width. Maybe this can be seen better with 2. Try it with 2. Hmm. Sorry, I'm just trying to think about how to set this up on the fly because I didn't expect this. So box 1, we're gonna say flex, no growing. Yes, you can shrink, and then maybe auto, and then box 2, we're gonna say yes, you can grow. So that's gonna take up the available space. And then, oh, we will need 3 boxes here, so let's, So yes, you can grow. No, don't shrink. And then auto as well. And then box 3. Flex, you can grow. And don't shrink. And we want to say, we actually want to say 2. Make this the default. That's what I want. Okay. It's changing it the way I want it to. Not really. Essentially what you do here is when you're doing flex grow and flex shrink, you're allowing it to take up as much space. So this will be 2 parts of space, while these only take up 1 part of space. Maybe you can see it better when I say 1. Okay, you can see better this way. So right now I have box 3, which is here. Box 3 is taking up 2 parts of space, and these 2 boxes are only taking up 1 part of space. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense to you, but it's calculating all of the space available. It's giving this one 2 parts, and it's giving this one, each of these is taking up 1 part of the available space. So even though I don't have it necessarily, even though I don't necessarily have a width set on this one, you can see that this is the halfway line. And there are 4 parts here. This one's taking up 2 parts, and this one's taking up 3 or 1 part each. So this whole section here is being recalculated on the fly by the browser using Flexbox. So we're not having to use any kind of calc function or anything like that to be able to calculate the space available in the middle, like inside of Flexbox. So, or inside the Flexbox. It's actually doing it for us on the fly using Flexbox, the spec, and then it's giving this. So based on however much, what is this? This is 620 pixels. So out of the 620 pixels, this container, box 3, is getting 2 parts of the remaining space, and each of these boxes is getting 1 part. And as that viewport changes, we maintain that ratio of 2 parts to 1 and 1. And this is done over here because we're saying 2 parts. We could also say 3 parts. And so now it would get 3 parts while each of these gets 1 part. You can see how it's changed. We could say 4 parts or 5 parts. And you can see how it's just giving more and more space to this particular element because we're allowing it to grow and take up 5 parts of the space. And we could also do, you could allow this to take up 5 parts and 3 parts and 1 part. So now we have 5 plus 3 is 8 plus 1 is 9. So you have 9 total sections or parts inside of this viewport. This is always going to take up 5 parts of that. This will always take up 3, and this will always take up 1. So you can see that how they're able to move and take up different parts. So This is one way that you can create like a super flexible grid type layout. So if these could equal, you could do like a 1/3 1/3. I'm sorry, make this 4 4 and 4. And then you've created kind of an equal 1/3 1/3 1/3 layout. You could do this one to be 8, and now you create kind of a half and half, but you've created it between 3 different items. So that's a little bit different. And then you could do a 9, 3, and 3. It should be a 2/3 1/3 layout with this one split here. So you can see you can do kind of some different powerful things just using the flex without changing the container size, without saying that the container is going to be a particular anything. You're just allowing these things to grow and to shrink. Again, you're going to want to set these things to you're going to be able to set these things to auto. No, that's not. Okay. IE is going to have a hard time. So Internet Explorer is going to have a more of a difficult time parsing this. So you might have to just kind of work with it and make some changes. Now, Flexbox is not meant to actually do layout like this. So you can do layout. You can set up larger layouts, but that's actually going to be the responsibility of CSS Grid, which is not coming until 2017, many people think. And then once you get CSS Grid, then you're going to be able to lay out your website just like you have been when you're using Foundation or Bootstrap or one of those frameworks. You're actually going to be able to lay that out in the CSS as opposed to using classes and bringing in extra CSS on top of that, on top of what you're already doing. So Flexbox can do some layout things, but it's mainly meant to do alignment and adjustments inside of the CSS grid layout. So it does work inside of Elements now, and you can use it. But once CSS grid gets fully implemented, then you're going to see how Flexbox works inside of those, inside of that larger spec. So exciting things are coming, and you can already do some kind of cool things. So playing around with the different parts of Flexbox is really fun. And it actually can solve some problems for you that are more easily solved than using a big framework like Bootstrap or Foundation with a lot less code. And you'll find that once you get the hang of centering things, it'll just kind of be something you always wanted to do. You wanted it to be that easy, but it just never was. So I encourage you to check out the centering, especially, and the alignment, to do kind of some fun things, some unorthodox things, where everything's not floated to the top of the element. But Flex Grow and Flex Shrink, I know I haven't explained it very well. I've tried my best to understand it, but for a lot of things, a lot of projects, you're just going to have to kind of understand the concept of what it means to grow into the element or into the available space, and then just kind of play with it until it starts coming out like you want it to be. So that's been my particular experience because every project and every place that you put it is a little bit different. If you have any questions, and you may, go back to this Chris Coyer's guide and see if that'll help you through some of the questions that you have. You can also ask me, so you can just leave a comment or a question below the video. I'll be happy to get back to you on that as best I can. There are some other resources out there with Flexbox, and I encourage you to watch those videos or read those tutorials as well. And maybe after you've looked at the fullness of all those things, you'll have a better understanding of how to use things like Flex Grow and Flex Shrink. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.